Namaste, and welcome back to Waking Up with Mindful Serenity. We're going to continue answering a question from the jar. I'm just going to reach into my trusty jar back here and pull out a question. And then I will take a nice deep breath and exhale just to clear the cobwebs from this mind of mine. I will set my timer at 10 minutes. And I will begin reading the question. Is fear sometimes called for? Is fear sometimes called for? Is fear sometimes called for? I'm reminded of a quote from Will Smith that says, "Danger is real, but fear is a choice." Danger is real, but fear is a choice. And this is quite synchronistic for me to have this question because of what I'm dealing with in my own personal life right now. I am in a household that we are discovering has a major wasp infestation in the roofs and the floor and the wallboards, and I am deadly allergic to wasps. So on a given day, up to 20 wasps can be removed from the inside of the household. Not at the same time, mind you, they're not all flying around at once. You might only see 3 or 4 flying around inside here at once, but there can be up to a dozen in the porch between, and it's only a small porch between the kitchen and the outside. And so Don is kind enough to remove them for me. He's been stung a couple times. I have yet to be stung. I have an EpiPen finally. I never had an EpiPen up until yesterday when I got caught in the kitchen between the living room where a couple of wasps were flying around and a wasp that was, these are usually non-aggressive wasps, but it was very aggressive yesterday and I couldn't understand why. It kept, every time I opened the door, it would fly in at the door towards me. And I realized later that there was one of his friends, or it's probably a her, I don't know why I say he, but one of another wasp was squished on the floor, and when a wasp is squished or crushed, it will release a pheromone that other wasps will pick up and know that it's there's a predator or a threat to their survival. So they will gather with their mind, hive instinct, and attack whatever's there. So that's why this wasp that was trying to come into the screen at me yesterday was aggressive. But these paper wasps are usually not aggressive. They'll leave you alone. But it doesn't matter. I cannot risk a sting. You know, it can take 100 stings for the average individual to develop a problem with it, like a life-threatening emergency. And like at one time 100 stings, or for someone with an anaphylactic allergy, it can take up to 1 sting. And you know, I debated whether or not I was allergic or not, and it was something I thought, oh my God, my fear is getting the best of me, my mind's taking it away. But I had vivid recall for some reason during this wasp infestation of how serious that first allergy I had to a wasp sting was. I swelled up very quickly. In a matter of minutes, I got stung in the upper arm, and my whole arm was swollen. My face was swollen. Everything was swollen. I began to vomit really, very quickly, and I do recall either passing out or at least collapsing. And I was very sick all night. I was at Brownie Camp at the time, and at that time, people weren't aware of wasp sting allergies or weren't thinking about things like that, so they treated it like I just incidentally had a flu at the same time or whatever, had the swelling in my arm and leg. So anyway, I stayed the night there and get home. I was never mentioned again in my life until I went to nursing school, and I realized after studying anaphylaxis and other allergic reactions that I was indeed allergic to wasp stings. And at that point, one point I had an EpiPen, but I only had one prior to this one. La-di-da-di, long story short, I am afraid of wasp stings. Yes, there is fear there. The danger, however, is real, as Will Smith would say, but the fear is a choice. And I wasn't afraid up until yesterday. I would walk through the porch where these very non-aggressive wasps would be congregating around the windows and whatnot, and there could be up to a dozen at a time. I did not like to walk through when there was a dozen, but I would walk through when there was 6 and try to get to the door as long as they weren't gravitating around the doorknob like they tend to do because it's warm. So but I was always cautious and aware and afraid to some degree of what could happen if I did get stung. That never went out of my mind, but I was just a little less afraid than I was yesterday. Yesterday, realizing that the danger was real and this wasp infestation we had was pretty big, considering that if we're removing up to 20 wasps a day from inside of the house in the porch, and there's, triple that amount outside, floating around outside the windows, can imagine how big these colonies are. Paper wasps don't tend to make big colonies all at once, but there must be a massive amount of colonies up there. There must be a big New York City in paper wasp population up there on top of my roof. So as I was reading along, I did what everybody does when they're afraid. They Google. And what does Google do? That really doesn't appease our fear, does it? It just increased it. And the more I learned about these paper wasps, and learned that, they can colonize with many different nests, close together. And it's probably a big colony if they're getting into several spots in your roof, which they are. I counted 20 entry and exit spots within the eaves of the house, so I'm quite sure they're in the attic and in the wall boards of the house. And they've been coming down even when the windows are, closed and stuff. So as I was reading this, I heard how if they get trapped inside, they can chew their way, because they're paper wasps, chew their way through the ceiling and land, and they have landed in swarms on top of people underneath the ceiling. And I could just imagine this. My fear just took over, and I could just imagine this big swarm of wasps above my head and them coming through on top of my head. And just as I was imagining that, there's this little vent in the corner of one of the rooms here, and I could hear the bzz, bzz. So, oh my goodness, am I just imagining that? I realized that my fear was a choice, and it was getting way out of control. But I also heard this, so I told myself it was just my fear talking. And then the dogs started to bark, and as the dogs were barking, 2 wasps came down through that vent and started flying around the house, and they were a little hyper agitated too compared to what they were normally like. So I was like, oh my goodness. So I ran out of the room thinking that this whole mass of wasps is going to fall down on top of me. Ran out of the room, tried to get out the door, but there was that angry wasp on the other side coming in, clicking up against the wall, clicking up against the door. And he was ready to attack because he could smell the pheromones coming from the wasp that was squashed below him on the feet. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is cray-cray. So I spent 2.5 hours locked into my little kitchen trying to cope with this wasp thing going on. I was allowing my fear to get bigger than the actual danger was. I did manage in that time, though, to do something very proactive. I called the pharmacist and ordered another EpiPen, which I got right away, knowing that I have allergies. And I had that. Dee was golfing at the time, so I was waiting for him to come pick it up for me on the way home. And when I got stuck in the kitchen, I found myself calling him, and I was in a panic, or texting him, but trying not to act like I was afraid, but very, very afraid, and wanting him to come home to do something about it, because I didn't know what to do. These guys are only an inch long each. They're very big for wasps, but they're still only an inch long, and there's only 2 of them on one side of me, one on the other side behind a glass door, but yet here I was feeling trapped in my own home, and it was not a nice feeling. I was allowing my fear to get much bigger than the actual danger. And we do that, right? Danger is real, but fear is a choice. But the question they're asked, is fear sometimes necessary? And I would say it definitely is. We have a fear system within our bodies in order to help us to survive. We have an amygdala, one part of the brain that's on guard for danger all the time, that's ready to prepare us for fight or flight at the first sign of a threat. And for some of us, that amygdala is very, very active. Mine was very, very active yesterday, let me tell you. Overly active. And sometimes it's not active enough. Some people don't respond to danger in the same way, and they are the individuals who will probably end up hurting themselves or being harmed because of their lack of fear. So we need to have a moderation between fear, right? We don't want it to extreme where it's ruling our lives to the point that it was always over-exaggerating danger, which happens a lot of us in fight or flight and, chronic stress. And we don't want it to the point where it's underactive and we're not responding to dangerous situations or not taking dangerous situations serious enough. So D tends to be on the under, his reality and version of danger is below what is healthy. And mine, especially yesterday, was above it. So we need to find this happy medium. So I know I have to leave this in place until the wasp situation is cleaned up. The reality of a sting is life-threatening for me. So it's like, okay, I really need to go. But for him, he can stay because he's not allergic. I definitely don't think he should go up there and do the extermination or whatever he's going to do by himself, because he could get swarmed, and 100 stings is lethal to any human being, especially at one time. So you need to be very aware of that. And we don't know how many guys are up there. I'm just assuming there's a lot. And this is only spring, so by late summer, these guys may be taking over completely, and they'll be much more aggravated and cranky once the protein sources run out and they're seeking some type of sustenance from the sweet stuff that's around them. So, yeah, it's only going to get worse. So this human in this body has to leave. She's making a choice that she has to leave the space until the wasp situation is cleared up. And that is looking at fear as a survival mechanism. That fear that I had is helping me to respond to an actual danger in my environment. So, yes, sometimes fear is necessary. Well, I gotta go. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have an amazing day.